some astonishing new statistics. And this was summarized in a website called Wait But Why, and the title of the article is The Fermi Paradox. So if you want to look this up yourself, that's where you go and find it. Now, I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm just going to get to the core of what they do after they do all the math. And once they do all the math, the conclusion is that at least 1% of every star in the universe has a planet on it with liquid water like the Earth. That's crazy. That means it's 100 billion Earth-like planets. And that means that if you go around and you count every single grain of sand in the world on every single beach, there's 100 planets like the Earth for every single grain of sand. Now that's a lot different than what we've been hearing up until recently. This is a whole new way of looking at it. And then if you assume that only 1% of these planets have had life evolve on them like it is now, and if you saw my talk last night, you'll know that's a very low estimate and not true, then every grain of sand on Earth now represents a planet with inhabited life. Every single grain of sand on the beach. So be careful where you're walking, right? Ow! Ow! God damn it! It's crazy. I mean, how can you even wrap your head around that? Every single grain of sand is an inhabited world. How much sand is there right outside the building here? My God, go out and take a handful of sand and think that each one of those grains, as you just let it drop out of your hand right outside the door here, there goes a world with intelligent beings on it? Holy smokes. And that's just a little bit of sand. There's a lot more sand than that. It hurts your head, right? It's like, damn. But then it gets even crazier, of course. That's why you're here. Then he's making an assumption that only 1% of those planets have life that's as intelligent or more intelligent as we are on Earth. Hopefully it gets a lot better than it is here. And I'm sure it does. If that's true, then that means there are 10 quadrillion or 10 million billion intelligent civilizations in the universe. Now, that's a lot. You apply the same math to the Milky Way galaxy, and this leads to an estimate that there is 1 billion planets that we could go live on. So there's a lot of real estate out there. If we screw this one up, we got a backup plan. And so as soon as we, as I said last night, as soon as we get to these new planets, we'll set up shop, we'll build SUVs, get the fossil fuel, start chemtrailing the sky. Boom. America, baby, all the way. This is what we do. Get her done. No, we're not going to do that, I promise. You're not allowed to travel off your own planet unless you get to a certain level of sophistication. They estimate, this is NASA now, estimating 100,000 intelligent civilizations in our galaxy alone. Super advanced. And that means that as soon as they break the ability to travel through light speed, and they can go faster than that, they can get here. As soon as you can build a stable wormhole, you've got superluminal travel. It's like those two places don't exist. You just fold up space, and they're both now in the same location, and it pops back, and there you go. So, in the law of one material, which is material that was channeled based off of what happened in the 1950s, and I'm going to be sharing with you now pretty soon, they estimate there's approximately 100 million inhabited worlds in our galaxy. So based on these new numbers that I've given you, that's not a far stretch. We now know that there's these planets with liquid water everywhere, and disclosure is moving forward. This was on June 29th. They're now revealing this planet Gliese 832c, and this is an artist's conception of it, is only 16 light years away, and we go there and have all the comforts of home. We got liquid water, we got the right temperature, it's in the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, just right. That's what they call it. And here is a list from NASA, from a division of NASA now, revealing all of the planets that are potentially habitable that are very near us. These are only the closest ones. So this totally changes what used to be used by the skeptics. It was their crack cocaine to shoot us down in the UFO field, the dreaded Drake equation. This guy, and that's the equation on the chalkboard behind him there, or the whiteboard, he's saying that we calculate these different factors and life basically becomes so rare as to be almost impossible. That's not what they're telling us anymore. So life is actually a byproduct of the universe. If the universe is actually made by this single geometric form that's vibrating, then that means anything we see on Earth must be part of that geometric form. Does that make sense? Because it's holographic, right? So you zoom into any point of quantum space, and whatever you see there is from that geometry. So therefore, life must be part of the geometry. Therefore, consciousness must be part of the geometry. It's just basic philosophy now. Well, this was proven by Dr. Luc Montagnier, a Nobel Prize-winning biologist who, in the year 2011, did an incredible experiment where he takes 2 tubes of water. Now, notice what's going on here. You see what looks like a can. And you see one tube over there on the left in the middle of the black area. And that tube is a test tube of water that's got DNA floating in it. And then underneath, you see 5 other test tubes. All those test tubes are simply filled with pure, ordinary water. Then all he's doing is he wraps a coil around the 2 tubes and shoots it with 7 hertz of energy, of electricity, and then waits for 18 hours. That's the basis of the experiment. So here he is with 2 glasses of water, and that could be as simple as his experiment is. If there was a humming electromagnetic field nearby, if he's near a cell phone tower or something, boom, it could be that simple. And you could end up with germs in the water, because that's what ends up happening. Check this out. Montagnier takes these 2 hermetically sealed tubes of water. One of the tubes, as I just showed you, has a trace amount of DNA in it. And then he electrifies both tubes with a 7 hertz electromagnetic field. The water molecules in the second tube then actually rearrange into DNA. So what is water? What's the chemical name for water? H2O, and that means there's 2 hydrogens and 1 what? Oxygen, right? That's all there is. That's all water is. How the hell do you turn hydrogen and oxygen into DNA? Alchemy. There's some sort of transmutation of elements going on. So that's actually happening in the tube. And therefore, DNA appears to be a quantum field effect that does not require other life to exist. Well, the implications of this alone, if they would just combine what Montagnier discovered with what NASA is saying, all those planets in which you go outside and you take a handful and you just dump it out of your hand, and each one of those is an inhabited world with life on it, and liquid water. Anytime you got liquid water, these quantum fields are going to start making microbes. It's not going to only happen on Earth. It's a cosmic effect. One of the guys that discovered DNA, Sir Francis Crick, was working on a problem with the dust in the galaxy. And if you've read my book, then you know that they figured out that 99.9% of all the dust floating around in the galaxy is freeze-dried bacteria. And how did they figure that out? They were looking at the light coming off the dust, and they concluded that the dust is 70% hollow on the inside. They spent years trying to figure out why in the world is all the galaxy's dust 70% hollow on the inside. This was in 1981 they published the paper that revealed this. You can see how far it's gone. Nobody talks about it. If you take bacteria because they got water inside their bodies and you freeze-dry them, then the inside of their body opens up into a big cavity as all the water leaves, and they're 70% hollow on the inside. Exactly the same as all the dust in the galaxy. Where is the dust in the galaxy coming from? It's coming off the surface of stars. It's called the solar wind. The stars are very dirty. They're shooting all this dust out. But it's not dust. It's life forms. It's microbes. So you see every single star is absolutely loaded with life. When you're looking at the sun, you're looking at this huge organic factory that is constantly shooting out microbes. That's all it makes. The only thing that the galactic dust is made of is microbes. So life is everywhere. The universe is biological. The universe is made to build biological life. And we're starting to see more and more proof that life can arrange spontaneously from non-living material. Hence, it shows up in the water. And there was another big piece of disclosure that came out. Nobody's really talking about it. The first time I ever debuted this was last night. So if you haven't seen that talk, I recommend getting the video. All life shares a common DNA core. And this is where it came from, in the ribosomes, these 4 billion-year-old molecules. And the ribosome is the basic part inside each cell. And you see that thing that says LUCA there? Look at the shape. What these scientists have discovered, this is very recent now, is that every type of life they see, and the top one on the left is archaea, that's the oldest archaic bacteria on Earth. And then they got yeast, they got the fruit fly, and they got human DNA and human chromosomes in the ribosome. Everybody from the oldest time to the present, everybody's got the same DNA blueprint in there. That's the basic building block. And it says here at the bottom of this page, at its core, the ribosome is the same everywhere. The ribosome is universal biology. Notice he didn't say it's only here on Earth. He said universal. The ribosome is a basic building block. It's a genetic pattern written into quantum mechanics. And then he says here, we learned some of the rules of the ribosome. Evolution can change it as long as it doesn't mess with the core. Evolution can add things on, but it can't change what was already there. So, we're getting these leaks of this kind of information in the media. NASA is telling us that there's as many inhabited worlds in our cosmos as grains of sand. We got all these places we could go move to nearby, right near the Earth, with liquid water that would be comfortable for us to live in. And if you take all the things that I've told you about Montagnier, where he's got DNA in one tube and then plain water in the other tube, that would ultimately imply that all of life on Earth is part of a divine design. Divine just meaning energetic, non-physical. That would mean that life on Earth is written into the quantum blueprint of space and time itself, and then that would mean that the human design, the human body, is actually a galactic blueprint. Think about it. It's just a logical extrapolation that humans are being made everywhere because life, remember what did I say about the surface of stars? Stars are shooting out bacteria. It's like this shower of germs. Good Lord, don't go out into space if you're a hypochondriac. They're everywhere. It's so dirty. But if you think about what this really is saying, the stuff that, all the life that we see on Earth is happening according to a blueprint. There's an intelligent pattern that's being used to make us the way we are. This didn't happen randomly at all. Life is the same at its core. So that means there's humans all over the place. Well, I've done now, many episodes of Ancient Aliens, 7 episodes in Season 2, and every episode that they've come out with, which is almost weekly since last October. And it's a lot of work. I mean, I'm doing a taping every 3 or 4 weeks, it seems like, sometimes even more often than that. So they're asking me all these questions, and I'm learning a lot because they're asking me to do research and then speak about things that they asked me to study. And more, even more than ever before, I'm realizing every ancient culture has human beings showing up who can levitate, who can read their minds, who have advanced technology, and who teach them about religion and spirituality. Now, these are ancient extraterrestrial visitations, but did these people really vanish? Or did they just sort of hang out in the background? In 1952, they started to move for open contact with us. They showed up again. Now was the time. Why did they pick 1952? Well, it was 7 years, or no, it was only 5 years after Roswell. Roswell was 1947. Roswell happened as a result of us trying to use nuclear weapons and succeeding. Once we have the ability to blow up the planet, the game changes for these human ETs because they're the spiritual gardeners. They're responsible for keeping us safe. So some very strange things start to happen in 1952. First of all, in and around Washington, D.C., flying saucers start to show up. They actually overflew the National Airport, which would be a much more polite place to land than the White House lawn. You might mess up the grass. They overfly the National Airport. And then this is what it was, all these sightings in and around D.C. and Northern Virginia, which is right below D.C., that led to Project Blue Book being created because the public demanded the truth. And this is what started it all. It was in 1952. Here's another newspaper headline from the Alexandria, Virginia Gazette, eyewitness story of flying saucers seen along Alexandria Clarendon. Now, the biggest move they made was to actually fly directly over the U.S. Capitol building. And this is a digital reconstruction made by History Channel, but this is actually a real photograph of that night. Now, in the iPhone era, if they did this now, there would be no more UFO cover-up. It's done. But in 1952, it was okay, because not everybody believed it, even though lots and lots of people saw this. These were basically triangular-type craft and also disc craft. This is another slide from 1952, this time in San Francisco Bay and San Leandro, those flying discs. So actually, believe it or not, the government had to make an official press conference with Major General John Samford. This was on July 29th, 1952, in which he openly comes forward on camera and says that the UFOs are real, we're seeing them, but they do not appear to be dangerous or harmful. That actually did happen. We actually got told the truth. It just didn't go very far. So then, on July 31st, after, like 3 days after he makes this talk, right, or 2 days after, the Air Force gets pissed off. And they said, well, you know, so many people are asking us about flying saucers that it's hampering our work. So will y'all just please screw off and stop calling us on the phone? Jesus, okay. Flying saucers, forget about it. So it would appear that there was an invitation being made. It would appear that the ETs are following a prime directive. And when they overflew the state capitol, the Congress building rather, when they overflew the Capitol, what are they saying? If the public demanded to know the truth, if the public wanted to know who are these people, what do they want, why are they flying over, are they inviting us to talk to them? And this little psyop that you're seeing right now didn't work, where the Air Force says, please stop calling us and asking about the flying saucers. If people had kept on calling and not felt ashamed to call, we could be in a very different world. So at first blush, it would appear that it didn't work, that these ETs in 1952 did not succeed in their goals. Or did they? This is where we get into the next very interesting part of our talk that relates directly to this part of the country, right where you are right now. The Institute of Mental Physics, as it was called, was built to be right near where all these contacts were happening. The contacts actually started by ham radio telegraph, where people send Morse code over ham radio channels. And that was the 1950s equivalent of email. That's the best you could do, other than just frickin' picking up the phone and making a phone call. But it's a lot more cool to do Morse code over the ham radio. It's like a geek thing, right? So one of the people who was interested in this was Dr. Wilbert Smith, who was a Canadian radio communications engineer, and he had a top secret clearance from the Canadian government. So sure enough, in 1952, what we find out in his book, The Saucers Speak, is that 12 different groups around the United States and Canada were contacted by extraterrestrials using Morse code on the ham radio. The ETs wanted to talk to us. They said, if the Congress won't talk, then we'll go right to the people. Screw the government. Which is good. W.B. Smith was personally contacted by a ham radio telegraph through his friend Lyman Streeter, and this ended up showing up in Michel Dobrenovich or George Hunt Williamson's book, The Saucers Speak. George Hunt Williamson was sort of like the alpha male of the 1950s UFO movement that was all happening here. There were big, gigantic events happening where people would gather over at Giant Rock, actually. It was all outside. It wasn't in this nice campus. That's actually why this was built, because what they used to do in the 1950s was like Burning Man. You're way out in the middle of the desert. There's nothing around. You just got a tent and a chair and your car. And yet there were like 5,000 people coming to this. So it was huge. And this was where the big flying saucer event was every year. So they hid W.B. Smith's identity, but people who knew George Hunt Williamson directly, in fact, the Law of One staff themselves, told me that he is the scientist referred to in the book. In fact, Don Elkins actually wrote in the margins of the book where it says the scientist, he wrote in W.B. Smith. And I read that book when I was at L&L, which is that's where the Law of One was done. Now here's the deal. These ETs, when they showed up, they didn't just want to talk about religion and spirituality or interesting cosmic stuff. They had a very specific message that they kept telling these 12 different groups of people. And what they said was that our solar system was moving into a more highly energetic region of the galaxy. Now, based on what I was telling you about atoms, right? What did I say an atom was? Is an atom made out of particles? No. An atom is made of vibrations, right? What happens if you change the vibration of the vibration? I'm starting to sound like Abraham now, right? If you vibrate your vibration to a higher vibration, then your vibrations will vibrate in a vibration unlike the vibrations that were vibrating once you were vibrating before. And thus you can vibrate your vibrations to a vibration of a higher vibration and out-vibrate the vibrations of the lower vibration. Uh-oh, I just got myself in a lot of trouble. Anyway, what's happening is that the actual nature of how matter and energy runs and consciousness is upgrading. There's a dimensional shift taking place. Because remember, when you drop that cannonball, that fluid, the energy, right, it pushes out of the cannonball, and it's in some other reality, and it doesn't show up as a weight increase until it reaches a critical mass in our reality. So this energy that makes matter exists in some other place, doesn't it? That's what's so trippy about this. The beings also said that we would get more cosmic rays, and that ultimately our entire solar system would be transformed. Now, I don't have time to go into it today, nowhere near, but I have amazing slides you can see on Gaiam TV. And again, I've said this before, but please, if you're going to sign up for Gaiam TV, 10-day free trial, and then it becomes $9.95 a month. You can watch everything for 10 days. There's no restrictions. If you do that, you got to sign up through wisdomteachings.com, not GaiamTV.com, because if you do it on there, I don't get any credit for you watching my show. I only get credit if you sign up through the gateway that says wisdomteachings.com. So please do that, because I'm trying to build up a subscriber base, and it doesn't seem to be working as well as it should. So that might be why. So thank you for paying attention to that. The entire solar system, they say, will be transformed by this process. And as I said, on Gaiam TV, I go through every planet in the solar system, and I show that they're all heating up, they're getting brighter, they're getting hotter, they're getting more magnetic. It's not global warming, it's not caused by fossil fuels. I certainly don't think that means we should rubber stamp the oil companies to go and pollute the atmosphere. But there's something happening that's charging up our planet that's much bigger than that. They do explain that they gave a message to the world governments and that the message was ignored. W.B. Smith hid his identity from Williamson's books due to the fact that he had a security clearance. And then over time, telepathic messages, or telegraphic messages by ham radio, switched over to direct mental telepathy through members of the group. W.B. Smith then built a series of questions that only he knew the answer to, and when he found people that actually were in contact with these beings, they always answered the same correct answers of about 100 different questions. So he had a 100-part questionnaire that everybody was screened at, and one of the places that he looked, incidentally, for people who were having contact was right here, Giant Rock. He'd come to these conventions, he'd talk to people, he'd say, okay, who knows what's going on? Who says they're in contact with extraterrestrials? What are they thinking? What are they saying? Then he'd go and interview them, and he'd take you off into a private area. And he'd have you go into trance, and he'd run you through this 100-part questionnaire. That's one of the ways that he found these people. And he found a significant number of people who were all answering the same questions nearly identically. There was only very small discrepancies that were usually caused by them being Christian and trying to put Jesus and biblical interpretations into what they were getting. Another very interesting thing is that they gave him a vortex detector, which they called areas of reduced binding. there was a problem with planes crashing out of the sky, and the ETs explained that sometimes there's these vortexes that liquefy the metal. The atoms in the metal just start to go gooey, and then the plane just falls apart in the air. And so they wanted you to be able to know where these were, and they explained that this was why they also explained on a different level the Mantell crash, a very troubling event. So what happened here? This is what made the U.S. government scared of extraterrestrials. This was in the 1950s. A fighter pilot spotted a UFO, Charles Mantell his name is, and engaged in a high-speed chase with it. He flew too closely to the UFO, which the people in the UFO didn't account for that would happen, and his ship was destroyed, and it crashed. And some very strange stuff happened. This is what freaked out the U.S. government like crazy. First of all, the entire ship was totally Swiss cheesed out with tiny little holes everywhere, like little bitty holes just punched through. And the body, of course, was in a ghastly condition as a result of this. And then what was also very strange was that there was a strange gravitational anomaly around the ship, so that when you walked towards it, you actually had to lean and stand up sideways to stand up, because the gravity was so wonky. So when they saw this body all trashed and all these holes in it, they said, this looks like some sort of particle beam weapon. These ETs attacked our ship and they destroyed our man, and therefore they're dangerous. So the U.S. government became extremely troubled by this, and this probably more than anything was the reason why they started to see extraterrestrials as hostile. So the ETs tried to explain through these contacts that W.B. Smith was talking to. More than one person had the same information come in. They said, yeah, it was an accident, and we're very, very sorry about it. They explained that, he was just very stupid, and he wasn't paying attention, and he got too close, and he flew too high of an altitude, and he got close to them, and it ruined his plane. They also described technology. They said, here, let's give you something that can help you. We don't want you to lose planes anymore. You need to know where these vortex points are so that if you fly into them, that you don't fly into them when they're active, because they'll make your plane come apart. So they gave him a very simple technology. They said, take a piece of fishing wire, like a monofilament, and stretch it almost to the point of breaking. And then you wrap the wire around a spindle that leads to a meter, and I'll show you a picture of this. It'll make a lot more sense in a minute. And then actually, believe it or not, the vortex causes the atoms inside the fishing line to either get closer together or farther apart. They start to stretch. And that actually causes the needle to spin. So here's the detector. And I'm telling you, if we start selling these, wow, a lot of people would buy them. But we haven't figured out, I haven't tried to build these yet. But it's a very simple thing. You got an aluminum tube, as it says there. You got brass caps on the top and the bottom. You have a spring in the middle, a steel spring. And then you have the nylon fiber, the monofilament fishing line. You stretch it almost to the point where it's going to break, but it doesn't actually break. And then, as you go through a vortex, as it stretches and loosens, you notice that it's wrapped around the spindle, and the spindle attaches to a pointer across that dial. That dial goes from 1 to 9, and it will tell you how strong the vortex energy is in a given area. So they were able to find vortexes this way, and it turns out they were big, giant circles of energy moving across the surface of the Earth. So W.B. Smith's conclusions, based on all this stuff that was going on here, this is where he met a lot of these people, is that telepathic communication is very real. It can be repeated under scientific laboratory conditions, and different sources of people gave nearly identical answers to technical classified questions. And the big point, again, was they were convinced that something is happening throughout our entire solar system. Lo and behold, I was very fortunate that inside L&L I found the original 1958 transcript of the first speech that he ever gave, called Why I Believe in the Reality of Spacecraft. This is a scan of that yellowed piece of paper. It was like a treasure, man. I couldn't believe it. And again, on Wisdom Teachings, I have some episodes where I go through and read this in a lot more detail than I'm going to do today. But here's the introduction where he says, I've been actively engaged in the investigation of flying saucers for over 7 years. I started the investigation out of curiosity, an extreme skeptic, fully expecting that it would be due to man-made natural causes. Then as we go on to the next page, he says, let's look at a few facts here. And he says, there have been quite a number of alleged communications with intelligences claiming to be extraterrestrial. I have followed up each such instance which came to my attention to the best of my ability to either establish or disprove them, and B, to obtain any information that might be available if they were authentic. So as we said before, and this next part is where he reveals this, he asked these channelers over 100 questions, and the real contacts all gave the same answers to the questions. And that's, in this next page, that's actually where you read that. And it says it right here, in this next little part that pops up. The procedure in checking contacts was to ask a number of innocuous but significant questions and compare the answers with the answers to the same questions as obtained through other contacts. Questions were like this: do people live on the planet Mars? If so, what is the general shape of their houses? Do people on Mars use coinage money? If so, what does it look like? Altogether, some 100 or more questions were involved. The results were spectacular, to say the least. Among the contacts that might be classed as authentic, there was almost complete agreement. Among other alleged contacts, there was extremely poor agreement or none at all. And then he talks about the religious bias that people have that made them want to answer it a certain way. So another interesting thing is that the ETs consistently emphasized the law of one, that we're all part of one conscious, continuous energy field. So then what he says here is, the inevitable conclusion is it was all real enough, and these people from elsewhere were probably just what they claimed to be. Their science was alien and possibly forever beyond our comprehension. That's the science I've been teaching you about today. That's this new stuff. Another approach was tried in philosophy, and here the answer was found in all its grandeur. I will not go into detail of the many revisions of basic thinking that we had to go through, except to say there were many. The people from elsewhere displayed great patience and understanding, and what they stressed is the basic oneness of the universe and all that is in it. Science, philosophy, religion, substance, matter, and energy are all facets of the same jewel. Notice he uses the term jewel, just like that jewel at the heart of quantum physics, the same title on that paper that I showed you before, the so-called amplituhedron. They're all facets of the same jewel. And before any one facet of the jewel can really be appreciated, the form of the jewel itself must be perceived. This is 1958. And now the science is catching up. Because it doesn't matter that it was in the 1950s. The people talking to him were time travelers that had science and technology way more advanced than we do now. They also told him, without any equivocation, that the human form extends all throughout the universe, which is, again, very interesting for us now. So here's the page where that is revealed. And we're going to go into a quote right here, where he said, one of the most important things I had to realize was that we are not alone. The human race in the form of man, and again, it's 1950s, so that wasn't sexist yet. The human race in the form of man extends throughout the universe and is incredibly ancient. Also, its appearance in physical form is but one of its many manifestations along its path of progress. That's very interesting. What he's saying is that we start out as a human physical flesh and blood body, but ultimately we transform into pure energy, and that's the next level of human evolution. That's what the Tibetans are all about. That's what the rainbow body is. That's why 160,000 people following these Tibetan Buddhist teachings I'm going into tomorrow, they actually got their life to transform. If you really go through the discipline, you can do it at any point. And the key is, if every thought that you think is a loving thought. Now, these guys are meditating in caves, and they're able to do this. But there's also something more interesting going on here, which is an energetic change that doesn't require you to be an Olympic athlete like that. Because if it was that way, nobody would make it. It's very few people can actually have every thought be a loving thought. So he says here, our civilization here on Earth is only one of many that have come and gone. Earth has been colonized many times by people from elsewhere, and our present human race are blood brothers of these people. Isn't that interesting? Is it any wonder that they are so interested in us? So here he's really laying down stuff that the whistleblowers have taught us, things that are becoming clearer over time. We are not alone. Humans have settled on Earth over and over again, and we are the descendants of various human visitors that have come to Earth over a long period of time. Now, the number one... Oh yeah, and here's another quote that we really need. I am informed that science is really much more simple than we imagine. That's what I've been teaching you about this jewel at the center of the universe, right? It's all fluid. I'm informed science is much simpler than we imagine, and all the component parts fit together perfectly without any corrections. Possibly we should start over again and reassemble our knowledge in a new pattern, and this time fit the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together properly without trimming off the edges. I am sure that if we do this and accept the philosophy upon which this new approach must by necessity be based, we will be able to enjoy the technology and way of life demonstrated to us by the spacecraft and our brothers and sisters from elsewhere. It's very, very cool. So the number one contact that he was using, the woman who really did the best job out of everybody in terms of the accuracy and the consistency of her contact, was named Frances Swan. I have seen pictures of her online, but now I can't find them when it really mattered. I was going crazy trying to find her picture this morning. I couldn't find it. But she was in contact with an extraterrestrial that called itself AFA. And what's interesting about this is that as a result of her coming to these events and people finding out about her, even though she was very humble and she didn't actually work as a featured speaker, she was just in the background, the government was here. And the government found out about her, and they started to interview her through the FBI. Now what you're seeing here is actually her handwriting while she's channeling this being that she called AFA. And then here is an actual typewritten transcript from May 23rd, 1954, showing that these beings are real people and that they're actually concerned about getting hurt by our government. In fact, here's what they say. We're terribly sorry to awaken you, but it helps very much to contact you when our sons venture earthward. They have much faith in you, and should anything happen that they get lost or hurt, it is our belief that with you as a contact, you might be able to help them, so that some of us could contact you and safely return to our bases. I did not tell you this before. I wanted to make sure you were in sympathy with our efforts. We are more than grateful for your cooperation with us. We will try to contact your government to the very best of our ability. It is not certain if we will have satisfactory results. Yeah, probably not a very good idea, you guys. But they were worried about things like Roswell, where if they come here, that they'd get captured by our government, they become political prisoners, kept in solitary confinement. They were concerned about this, because they're real people. So if you go to Grant Cameron's website, presidentialufo.com, Grant Cameron has a whole section of his website just dedicated to W.B. Smith. And he's really done more research now to upgrade the knowledge about W.B. Smith than anybody else. And this, believe it or not, what you're looking at right here is a leaked document from the government about the FBI agents talking to extraterrestrials through Frances Swan. And what we find out is, and there's, again, Gaiam TV episodes where I go through a lot more detail on this than I have time to do today. These FBI agents, it says in this next section you're going to see, received transmissions related to extraterrestrial life and biblical prophecies. And they were specifically being told, again, that we're going to go through this quantum leap. And I'm going to show you later on, before we run out of time, what the ETs said is going to happen to our planet, because it's very, very amazing. So this is the actual little line of excerpt. Blank stated that blank and blank had also heard the buzzing sound in their ears. These FBI agents were hearing a buzzing noise, but they'd not been able to receive transmissions. They weren't hearing voices speaking in their head, which is what they were told would happen if it worked. The FBI agents were not telepathic enough to get that to happen. Blank stated that the transmissions related to flying saucers, their location, why they were here, life on other planets, life in the hereafter, and biblical prophecies. Blank advised that blank could contact people in outer space by mental thought control. So they were trying to get in contact with us, and the best way they can do it is through telepathy. Now this next quote is really crazy, because according to AFA, the people that are visiting our planet in the 1950s were traveling in ships that were 150 miles wide, 200 miles long, and 100 miles in depth. That's pretty frickin' big. Now think about this. You might say, oh, this is bull. But Francis Swan answered 100 different questions the same way as all these other people did who never had spoken to each other, and they're asked the same questions under hypnosis and they give the same answers. So what does that mean? That means this is very likely correct. And in this leaked government document, how many of these motherships do you think the ETs have? Believe it or not, it actually says in the government document they had 5,000 motherships of 150 miles wide, 200 miles long. 200 miles? Ugh. And that's a lot of motherships. They said their main purpose of why they're here is to protect us from nuclear war. They do not want to see the planet get blown up. Absolutely. Isn't that amazing? To protect us from nuclear war and basically to guide us through this energetic shift that's going to happen as our planet transforms. So this is the quote right here. According to Blank, stated that there were 2 spaceships from which she had been receiving messages. They were described as 150 miles wide, 200 miles in length, and 100 miles in depth. Blank stated that these ships are designated as M4 and L11, and they also contain motherships which measure approximately 150 to 200 feet in length. Blank related that she was informed that there were approximately 5,000 of these motherships. He stated that AFA is the manager or the commander of the ship K4, or M4, it's M4. He's the manager of the ship M4, which is from the planet Uranus, and Panar is the manager or commander of the ship L11, which comes from the planet Hatan. Blank related that these contacts with AFA and Panar were for the purpose of protecting our Earth from destruction caused by the explosion of the atom bomb, hydrogen bombs, and wars of various kinds, which they, AFA and Panar, say disrupt the magnetic field of forces surrounding the Earth. They also related that contact was made for the purpose of protecting the whole universe, because if these magnetic fault lines break or shatter to pieces, it would affect the entire universe. AFA and Panar are presently working in the area of the Pacific Ocean repairing fault lines which are in danger of breaking. Well, it wasn't until the Disclosure Project in 2001, of course Dr. Greer is going to be here tonight. Yeah, isn't that awesome? That he first started to release information about people like Robert Salas who were seeing UFOs appear over their nuclear missile installations and powering the bases down. And then in 2011, there was a big event at the National Press Club, all of insiders just about this subject. All these different insiders that were actually calculating how many different ways people were seeing these UFOs, and they were looking at the statistics. And the calculations were conclusive in saying that UFOs consistently show up here, and their main concern is to make sure we don't use nuclear weapons. When you see UFOs, they're appearing near nuclear missile bases, and when they go there, the bases power down, but then after they leave, the lights come back on, everything's fine. They're not actually trying to kill us, they're not trying to hurt us, they're just turning the lights off, making sure that it still works, making sure they can still do it, and then they leave. And then less than a month after that big UFO event happened at the National Press Club, there was a huge UFO event over Warren Air Force Base in I believe it's in Washington State, where some of them, it's like a huge percentage of the whole U.S. nuclear arsenal is in this one base. And this UFO, a cigar-shaped UFO, showed up over the base and knocked out the power for over 24 hours. And fully I think it was 1/5 of the entire nuclear arsenal of the United States was taken offline. So they were showing us what they can do. And they underlined what these people said at that press conference a month before. We're here to protect you. Well, this government document leaked from the FBI that was not supposed to go public originally, but the Freedom of Information Act kicked it loose, said that these telepathic contacts that were moving through Francis Swan, apparently this guy AFA and this other guy Panar, who were working in these motherships, said that they wanted to set up contact with the FBI agent for August 1st, 1954. And they were going to use a high frequency They said that the ship from outer space would come within 100 miles, so they would have no difficulty in seeing it. Apparently, these FBI agents did see the ship, and then the beings continued to try to speak to them through Francis after they proved that they existed, and they wanted to set up contact for later that same month, in August. And this was not just going to be a small contact. They were making a deal with our government through the FBI that all 5,000 of their ships would appear in our skies, and this would be the moment of disclosure and contact. 1954, 5,000 motherships, and it says it right here in this next excerpt. Blank stated that he wanted to know if physical contact could be had with the people in outer space. Blank advised that the people in outer space want to know if they could provide them protection, and if physical contact were to be made with people on Earth, it would appear in the force that would consist of 5,000 bells or flying saucers. My goodness, that would be quite something. They go on to say that their ships would appear in late August 1954, and this information was forwarded through the entire U.S. military command. You can imagine what the U.S. military felt about the idea of a fleet of 5,000 motherships appearing in the sky. They didn't like that at all. But here's the quote of that. It says, this information, bottom paragraph, this information was forwarded to the Secretary of Defense, and copies were sent to the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and a letter was also written to the President of the United States. The FBI, of course, wants to see, is she trying to make money? Is she trying to be famous? And they found out, nope, she's humble, and she was not interested in publicity. So the Office of Special Investigations, which became the CIA, was given this information in the U.S. Air Force, and no further action is being taken by the Air Force. They're like, forget about it. Okay, so now I want to talk about the three Georges who were all here at these conferences in the 1950s. George Adamski, who I saw some posters for him in the big sanctuary room. George Van Tassel, he's the one that we're going to be looking at in a minute. And then George Hunt Williamson, who I already was talking about a little bit. So George Adamski is sort of the classic contactee guy. And bear in mind that George Adamski's contact was not with Greys, it was with these human-looking people that were telepathic and had advanced powers. And he had some very, very interesting photographs that he took of their ships and stories about the coming Golden Age and all kinds of interesting stuff. But George Van Tassel is really of interest to us because George Van Tassel actually was one of the people that W.B. Smith was talking to who were answering his questions correctly. And that channeling led to this book, The Council of Seven Lights. Copyright 1958. Look at that. Yucca Valley, California. Does that sound familiar? That's where we are right now. Because he built this thing called the Integratron that's right over here. You can go see it. And if that thing had worked, it would have been a Stargate. It's a big dome, and if you go in the middle of the dome, you can talk, and you'll hear your voice echoing in a really strange way. And the ETs told him it was really important that no metal would be used in its construction. So it's similar to the pyramid effect, but the idea is that by building this wooden dome, that you could potentially build a Stargate. Now here's the problem. A lot of the money that came in that made that Integratron built was from Howard Hughes, the billionaire. And Howard Hughes was told by these ETs, you have to make this available to everyone or we won't allow you to build it. And then Howard Hughes said, oh, sure, no problem. Then he starts putting all this money in, and you can still go see what his money financed. The Integratron is still here. But then Howard Hughes says, well, okay, I'm just going to let my billionaire and millionaire Illuminati friends in there for the first 2 years. And then after that, we'll let everybody else come in. So unfortunately, because of this, the ETs had to sabotage the project. That's all explained in the Law of One material. So the Integratron could have worked, and it would have made this area a very important pilgrimage site, because if you want to catch a cosmic magic carpet ride, you got to come to Joshua Tree to do it. So this could have become a very important area for the UFO field in general. Now this is what's so interesting. His contact says that our solar system, I'm looking now at the second paragraph, is in the arc between third and fourth density. And that when we go into fourth density, the Earth will rebalance on new poles and there will be a great earthquake written of in Revelations. Now I believe that earthquake is already happening. We're seeing extreme earth changes like the Indonesian tsunami. all kinds of crazy stuff. Fukushima is happening. This was his diagram of what he said, his contacts said was happening to us, that we're moving through these bubbles of energy from one level to another. And it's taken me all this time to actually understand that he's totally correct. And in other talks I have that I don't have time for today, but if you watch Guy MTV again, I have stuff on this. Our sun is actually orbiting another star in 25,920 years, and that's one of the big secrets. The end of the Mayan calendar is the end of that cycle. And you can break the cycle down into 12 subunits, which are 2,160 years each, called the ages of the zodiac. Well, that's exactly what these bubbles are that you saw in the previous diagram. 12 bubbles. It's the same thing. So the point here is, there might not actually be 12. Oh yeah, there are 12. So the point is, this is what's going on. He said in his contacts that our solar system is going to pass out of the maximum circumference of third into the minimum of fourth, and the length of the Earth's year will change, and it will become 370 days instead of 365.2422. So there's major, major changes that will occur to the Earth. And this is the first time that they talk about densities. This is what shows up in the law of one, third density. They say, do not confuse densities and dimensions. Densities are pressures in changing frequencies of vibration, but dimensions are measurements. And then look at this. Time cannot be measured in the absolute. Time can be phased in density and can be moved forward and backward. And then look at this highlighted paragraph at the bottom. As our solar system moves through space, it is moving into an ever-increasing frequency of vibrations. Each solar system and every planet must evolve through grades, even as babies learn to crawl before they can walk. And then he talks about these A and B lines of force, which we're not going to get into right now. Again, I go through this on Guy MTV. This is interesting. This is his view of what's inside the sun, according to his ETs, and it's that geometry. It's the same geometry that the cube is one of the things you get if you connect the dots around the Merkaba. If you've ever played around with a Merkaba sculpture, you can see that. So these ETs were hip to the geometry of the universe, way ahead of their time. This is 1958 that this book was published. So again, we don't have time to get into all this technical stuff here, but I want to go through this. The Earth's people only register time because the planet rotates and orbits. It's the movement of the planet through the universe that makes us think that we have time. They assume that time goes by, but time is infinite. All that people on a planet can register is their revolving planet passing through time. The people are in motion on the planet, so they assume that time is in motion. Actually, they are moving through time with no visible means of registering that time is actually completely still. If time ever actually did move, everything in the universe would collide, and all condensed energy or matter would explode. So that's very cool. The idea here is they're saying time is already there, and it's only because the Earth is moving around the galaxy that we think that time is moving forward. But it doesn't just move forward. It's all there, just like Kozyrev was saying. So that's George Van Tassel. He's talking about planetary rotation caused by these opposing lines of force. So this is where it all got started. So you guys are actually... I felt like I had to do this talk here because it's just so appropriate to be on this location. There was another really amazing group of ET contacts that happened in the 1950s in Italy that are very similar to the ones that were happening here, because believe it or not, ships were landing here and people were meeting these human ETs right around this area. Literally just a few miles away over at Giant Rock is where this was happening. So that's why they called this contact in the desert and why they wanted to have it here. So if you get a knock on the door tonight, just, be ready. Pack your bags. You don't need a boarding pass either. They're not going to give you a security check, or you're not going to have to get a complimentary genital massage or anything like that. You just get on board. So the Acri were a group of human extraterrestrials that contacted people in Italy, and this is their Sanskrit meaning. This is the Sanskrit character that they used to represent themselves when they appeared to people over in the Hindu culture. This Italian documentary is called Casa di Amicizia, Casadeamicizia. And it's a whole incredible show you can watch in which these Italian guys are contacted by people that look human. And these are illustrations from the show. Some of them were very tall, and others were actually very short. So this is one of the shorter humans. They look like us. And what's interesting is that a deal was worked out with these people. These people had the ability to teleport things in and out of our reality. They had the ability to read minds. They could create audio on a tape recording. You just start the recording, and then you let it run for a while, and then when you play it back, there's this voice speaking on it. And actually, these guys that they met with, and over 100 different people met with these ETs in Italy in the 1950s, they were told that, you know, they are our family, that they're from outside there in the cosmos, that they're trying to help us, and they just wanted to start on the personal level, one-on-one, let us get to know each other, and that their ultimate goal is to help us move through this big energetic change that we're going through that will bring us into a new level. They wanted to bring us into their civilization. They wanted to welcome us into their culture. And they also explained that they had a base underneath Italy that's huge. It's 300 kilometers wide by 150 kilometers long. And they called it W56 was the name given to them by the group. This base, they just used some sort of portaling technology and pushed out the land around the ground where the base was. So one of the books that you can read, which actually, I'm sad to say, it's not a particularly easy book to read, is by Stefano Breccia called Mass Contacts. I do have it, and the documentary actually is a lot more understandable than the book. The book kind of wanders around. But here's the thing. This Italian magazine, Domenica del Corriere, has pictures of these ETs in it where the ETs set up photo ops with these people they were talking to. And this is one of them right here. But this is the most incredible set. And the guy that took these photos is still alive, and you see him on camera. Now what he said was that little black hat that you see on top of the disc, that's actually caused by an electromagnetic field that it's giving off. It's a interference with the light. So that normally wouldn't be there. But these are all pictures that they posed for. Now again, this does not appear to be a hoax. This appears to be totally genuine, bona fide UFO photography. In this one, it's actually kind of phasing out of our reality. It's a little bit blurry. And in this shot in particular, you actually can see, if you look closely, two people standing inside this glass dome in the middle of the ship. You see two little dots where the people are standing inside the ship. And this documentary also reveals photos of the inside of the ship. The ETs allowed them to go inside and photograph the controls that run the ship. And that's what these little metallic objects are that you're seeing here. And I'm going to zoom in on the ones in the middle now. You can actually see they have these little handles that you put your hands over, and that's actually how the ship was run. It doesn't look like anything we use at all. And here's the hand of the guy who was involved in this contact doing this. So this was a very fascinating thing, because what they said was that we have to be in a certain state of harmony for them to be able to help us. And the unfortunate reality was that these people got too egotistical and too self-centered, and the ETs were actually driven away, and they weren't able to stay here anymore. So this was another attempt at the benevolence from our ancient past. They were once called gods, tried to show up, wear ordinary clothes, and just hang out with us on the beach and talk. But it didn't really work out too well. So now I want to conclude our talk here by going into this grand summary. This is by Baird Wallace, where he went through, the first publication was in 1972, and he looked at all the different summary of all the different stuff that these W.B. Smith contacts told us. The contact information states that our solar system is at this time transitioning from third to fourth density in the Vela system. That's what you saw in that book from George Van Tassel. And this change literally is a transition into a new area of space. This movement is changing the vibrational rate of the magnetic energy in the nucleus of every atom on Earth. This will have a tremendous impact on the form and expression of plant and animal life in our planet, which we haven't seen yet. It means everything's going to look different and be different. And it will have tremendous impact upon the consciousness of man. This has already started and is being amplified because man has fallen behind the evolution of the planet in his spiritual evolution and is not prepared for this change. The quality of life in fourth density that we are now moving into is a quality of emergence, the recognition from childhood of the inner presence of our Creator. Man in this cycle will undergo many changes and refinements in the sensitivity of his physical body. A whole new vista and scope of the nature of life will open up before him, and he will live with the knowledge of his purpose and a deep indwelling allegiance to the Spirit of the Creator. Summarizing various sources that have explained what's going to happen, there will be major rearrangements in the orientation of the planets and satellites in our solar system. An invisible planet close to the sun that's outside of our visibility range because of the matter state that it's in, called Vulcan. Vulcan, the closest planet to the sun, will be absorbed into the sun. Pluto will be spit out from the solar system. The moon is expected to leave Earth's orbit and turn into a planet, and there will be major changes in the orbital paths of the remaining planets. So what is this saying? I want to be very clear on this now. These prophecies are not predicting a gradual change. They're predicting some sort of cosmic solar orgasm. The sun goes